Turn that camera off, right now.
I'm on a public sidewalk, Chief. I'm allowed to film.
You need to stop recording and move along.
Keep your distance. I'm not interfering.
Give me the phone.
Chief, that's enough. Let it go.
Sergeant.
Step back.
This is my formal complaint. Everything's on the body cams.
We'll log it and review the footage. You'll get a notice when the...
Officers blocked a sidewalk outside a small city building. Their radios stayed silent. A citizen stood a few steps away with a phone raised. He recorded every move. The police chief walked out the front door and locked eyes with him. The chief ordered him to stop filming. The citizen refused. The chief stepped closer. His voice grew loud. Uniformed officers formed a line between the man and the entrance. The citizen asked for distance and kept recording. The chief tried to take the phone. A sergeant warned him to stop. Body cams captured everything. The citizen filed an internal review. Evidence stacked up fast. The chief faced a hearing that threatened his badge. The incident started on a slow Thursday afternoon. The sky hung gray above the city center. Rain stayed trapped in the clouds, waiting for the right minute to fall. Officer Neal sat in his patrol car near the courtyard of the municipal building. His dashboard clock showed 2:13 p.m. Nothing unusual happened. Pedestrians walked past benches. A city bus hissed at the corner and rolled away. The building looked quiet. Then a call came across the radio. The chief wanted all available units near the entrance of the city building. No details. No urgency code. No policy reference. Neal stepped out of his car and moved toward the courtyard. 3 officers already formed a loose line by the steps. The chief stood in the doorway with a red face and clipped tone. Neal's hand felt tense on his belt. The order sounded strange. Across the courtyard, a citizen held a phone in front of his chest. He stood on public ground. His lens pointed toward the entrance of the building. He did not speak. He did not interfere with anything. He filmed in silence. Neal recognized him. The man's name was Walker. He visited public buildings to record police activity. He always kept distance. He never crossed restricted areas. He never fought anyone. He recorded government employees in public space, and he knew his rights. The chief shouted at him again. His voice carried across the courtyard. Walker stayed calm. His hands never shook. He stood on the sidewalk and recorded. The officers glanced at each other. Confusion washed through the line. No one understood the order. The chief pointed at Neal and told him to seize the phone. Neal froze. He knew the law. Recording police from a safe distance stayed legal. No threat existed. No interference occurred. No safety hazard formed. Neal looked at his sergeant. The sergeant looked firm and rigid. No movement toward Walker. No step toward force. The chief moved down the steps. His shoes thudded against the stone. He stopped 3 feet from Walker and reached for the phone. Walker backed up a single step and kept filming. He spoke loud and clear. He said he stood on a public sidewalk and recorded a public official performing public duties. His tone stayed calm. Neal watched the chief's jaw tighten. The chief ordered everyone to move closer. No one moved. More civilians gathered near the benches. A woman holding groceries stopped to watch. A teenager pointed his phone at the scene. The officers formed a tense wall with no clear purpose. Neal asked the chief for a lawful reason to detain or disarm Walker. The chief snapped at him and told him to follow command. Neal felt heat in his chest. Orders had limits. They needed legal grounds. None existed here. The sergeant stepped forward. He told the chief that seizing the phone would violate policy, case law, and departmental training. He reminded the chief that every officer wore a body cam. Every second of this confrontation recorded. The chief ignored him and tried again to grab the phone. Walker took 2 more steps backward. The chief reached toward his arm. In that moment, Neal saw everything go from tense to unstable. A high-ranking official attempted physical force against a citizen without cause. Cameras recorded. Witnesses watched. The chief did not care. Neal saw a group of clerks standing inside the glass lobby, their faces pressed near the window. Everyone saw the same thing. The department's top authority walked a dangerous path. The sergeant stepped between the chief and Walker. He held up his palm. He ordered the chief to stand down. His voice stayed calm but unmistakable. The chief exploded with anger. He threatened to suspend every officer on the scene. Walker kept recording. His phone captured sound, movement, and every command. A city council member walked out of a side door and froze. She watched the confrontation from 10 yards away. She pulled her own phone from her pocket and recorded. The chief turned toward her and ordered her to stop filming. She refused. She looked at the sergeant and asked if Walker threatened anyone. The sergeant answered with one word: no. The chief's face flushed again. He stepped back and told the officers to escort Walker off the sidewalk. Neil stood still. The sergeant stood still. No one touched the citizen. No one had grounds. Walker said he planned to file a complaint. He described the incident out loud for the camera. He identified the chief by name and badge number. He repeated the location and the date. His tone stayed even. The chief stormed back to the entrance. He slammed the glass door behind him and disappeared inside. The officers stayed in the courtyard while citizens watched in silence. The sergeant told everyone to clear the area and return to patrol. The officers dispersed without speaking. Neil sat in his car and felt his heart pound. He pressed his fingers against the steering wheel. The scene unraveled in his mind. A chief publicly challenged settled law. A chief tried to seize private property without cause. Every step recorded. That night, the video hit social media. It spread across the city. The footage showed the chief stepping toward Walker. It showed him reaching for the phone. It showed the sergeant blocking his hand. It showed the officers refusing unlawful orders. It showed the city council member recording too. Comments labeled the chief as aggressive and ignorant. News outlets replayed the footage. Local reporters called the department for statements. The phones inside the precinct rang without rest. The next morning, Walker filed the complaint. He walked into the civilian oversight office with printed screenshots, timestamps, and witness statements. He requested an internal review. He requested disciplinary action. He requested release of all bodycam footage. The department command staff held a closed-door meeting. The windows in the conference room stayed covered. Officers outside the hallway heard muffled voices through the wall. Neil passed by on his way to the break room. He heard raised tones and threats of suspension. He heard mention of lawsuits and constitutional rights. 2 days later, Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation. They pulled bodycam video from each officer. They collected witness names. They requested written reports from every employee present. Neil wrote his statement with clear detail. He explained the chief's order. He explained that Walker stood on public ground. He explained that no threat existed. He explained why he refused to seize the phone. His sergeant wrote a similar statement. Other officers backed them. No one defended the chief's actions. Word spread fast inside the precinct. Some officers supported the chief. Others stayed silent. Morale split down the middle. The sergeant reminded his squad that the law protected the public right to record. No supervisor erased that, not even a chief. 3 weeks passed. Internal Affairs completed interviews and finished reviewing video. The file went to the city attorney. The attorney requested another meeting with the council. The council scheduled a closed session. The chief sat in his office with blinds drawn most of the day. Officers walked past without eye contact. Neil saw the chief leave early twice. His truck sat in the staff lot longer than usual. His office door stayed shut. The council released a short public notice. The chief's behavior raised policy concerns. The statement said a hearing would follow. Local media covered the announcement with intense interest. Citizens watched the story unfold like slow-motion fallout. Another 2 weeks passed before the official hearing. It took place in a city building with a small courtroom. Seats filled with spectators, officers, citizens, clerks, and defense attorneys. Reporters lined the back row. Cameras filmed every angle. Internal Affairs played the bodycam footage. The moment the chief reached toward Walker's phone echoed across speakers. The chief attempted to justify his action, but the sergeant's voice stopped him in the video. Then the council member recorded too. Nothing weakened the recording. No confusion existed. The footage showed clear commands, clear refusal, and clear intent. Walker spoke during public comment. His tone stayed calm. He described the experience. He said he never interfered. He said he never stood inside restricted areas. He said he filmed peacefully. He said he filed the complaint for accountability. The city attorney asked questions about training. The chief insisted he gave lawful orders. The internal affairs lieutenant corrected him. Recording in public spaces stayed legal. Seizure required probable cause. None existed. The council recessed for closed discussion. 1 hour later, they returned. The chamber stayed silent. Council members read their decision. The chief violated department policy. He violated recording rights. He used his authority in an improper manner. The council announced disciplinary action. The chief lost 2 months of pay. He received mandatory training and a written reprimand placed permanently in his file. The council removed his privilege to issue direct orders on scene until retraining finished. Gasps rolled through the room. Officers whispered. Walker sat with folded arms. He expected worse. Some expected termination. But the ruling landed hard. A chief lost command ground on video. After the hearing, the sergeant shook Walker's hand and walked him to the door. Neil watched from a distance. The moment felt historic. A citizen stood up, recorded, and defended his rights without force or anger. The system worked because the evidence removed doubt. The next day, Neil walked into roll call. The sergeant addressed the squad. He said the job demanded restraint. He said officers served the public, not the other way around. He said cameras protected good officers and exposed dangerous decisions. Neil listened with pride. Every officer nodded. Walker posted an update online. He thanked the officers who respected the law. He shared the decision sheet from the council. No bragging, no taunts. He focused on accountability. The chief returned to work 1 week later. He looked tired and aged. His voice stayed low during briefings. He never mentioned the case. He followed policy. He avoided confrontation. Officers wondered if he learned from the incident, or if he waited for retirement. Neil thought about the sidewalk every time he parked near the Civic Center. He remembered how small acts of courage changed outcomes. He remembered how cameras helped more than hurt. He remembered how one citizen forced a system to answer for its decisions. The incident changed internal culture. Officers trained harder on constitutional law. Supervisors briefed squads about recording rights. No officer thought of seizing a phone again without lawful grounds. The presence of cameras no longer bothered anyone. They welcomed them. The story that started with a raised phone ended in a courtroom with accountability. The lesson spread across nearby cities. Departments updated their policies. Leaders warned supervisors that orders needed lawful footing. No badge shielded misconduct. And in the quiet that followed, Neil understood something simple. The uniform meant nothing without integrity. The rank meant nothing without restraint. Cameras told the truth. The fallout moved slowly through the department. The chief stayed in his office most days. His voice stayed low during command meetings. Officers said he walked with smaller steps and shorter orders. The council ruling took his authority and placed limits on his presence during field operations. He approved schedules, signed paperwork, and left early. Neil watched tension settle inside the precinct. Some officers supported the chief, others kept silent. A few younger officers tried to test boundaries, but supervisors shut that down. The sergeant reminded everyone that bodycams recorded every shift. The training lieutenant added case law updates to every briefing. Recording rights became part of daily talk. One afternoon, 2 internal affairs investigators arrived with a follow-up list. They wanted reports from officers who worked with the chief before the incident. They asked about orders, safety calls, and policy compliance. Neil submitted every detail. He never saw the chief order an unlawful seizure before that day. He wrote that in his statement. The report balanced honesty and fact. The investigators finished their interviews and left. A week later, Walker returned. He filmed near the courthouse steps during a council meeting. Officers stayed across the street and watched. No one approached him. He stayed in public space. He recorded without interference. The moment proved that the ruling changed behavior. The city noticed. Citizens walked by without concern. Officers stayed calm. The chief did not appear. That night, Neil wrote a short note in his log. He said the public showed less fear around officers. He said the atmosphere felt lighter. The next morning brought a surprise. A city reporter requested an interview with the sergeant and 2 officers. The department approved the request. Neil took part. The reporter asked about policy changes. He asked about recording rights. Neil answered with short, direct sentences. The department wanted transparency. The story aired on the local news. Viewers responded with support. Trust in the department started to rebuild. A few days later, the chief attended a training session with the city attorney. Officers noticed the news release taped to the hallway board. The session covered public filming rights, Fourth Amendment limits, and seizure rules. The chief sat in the front row and took notes. He did not speak during the session. Afterward, he left through a side hallway without comment. That same week, an organized protest took place outside the precinct. It stayed peaceful. Protesters held signs about filming rights and accountability. Officers stood behind metal barriers and watched. No arrests, no shoving, no raised voice. A community organizer spoke through a bullhorn. He thanked the officers who followed the law. He thanked the council for the ruling. He ended the protest without conflict. Neil stood beside 2 rookies. He explained that calm responses protected everyone. One rookie asked if protests happened often. Neil said protests happened when citizens lost confidence. He said honesty stopped problems before they spread. The rookies nodded and kept watching the crowd. By sunset, the protest ended and the street cleared. Later that month, the city printed a brochure titled Recording Public Officials. It appeared in the lobby. It listed public rights in simple language. Officers read it during slow shifts. Citizens carried copies to events. Arguments about filming stopped. Confusion dropped. The brochure helped both sides, but inside the department, tension between command and line officers still simmered. The chief avoided public duty, but he still signed discipline forms. He still oversaw hiring. He still approved promotions. Some officers worried that his anger would resurface. Neil kept his focus on patrol. He ignored gossip and followed the law. He kept his camera charged. He stayed alert, but calm. One Friday night, a noise complaint brought Neil and his partner Becker to an apartment complex. Loud music echoed across the lot. A resident leaned on the railing with a phone held high. She recorded the entire scene. Neil approached the door and spoke politely. The tenant turned down the music without conflict. The resident with the phone did not interfere. Neil walked back to the patrol car with no tension. Becker said the filming made her nervous. Neil answered that cameras protected her if anything went wrong. She understood. 2 days later, a traffic stop went viral. A different officer ordered a driver to stop filming during a stoplight violation. The driver refused. The officer reached for the phone and the driver stepped away. The confrontation stayed small, but the video spread online. The department issued a statement saying the officer should have respected filming rights. The officer received a written warning. The public waited to see how the chief responded. He said nothing. The training lieutenant handled the issue without his voice. Inside the precinct, the sergeant formed a new plan. He wanted refresher training on First Amendment rights. He scheduled classroom time for every squad. Neil and Becker attended the second session. The training lieutenant replayed clips of peaceful recording and explained that distance and safety remained the only limits. No surprises. No confusion. During the training break, Neil stepped out into the hallway. The chief passed him without acknowledgement. His uniform looked perfect, but his posture looked strained. The ruling damaged his authority. Officers respected rank, but not his judgment. Some worried he waited for a chance to reassert control. That chance arrived faster than anyone expected. On a warm Saturday, the city hosted a public event across the downtown park. A stage stood near the fountain. Vendors sold food. Families ate while children played near the grass. The department assigned officers to foot patrol. Neil walked with Becker. Halfway through the afternoon, a dispute erupted near a vendor tent. 2 men shouted at each other. One accused the other of knocking over a table. Both stood nose to nose with fists clenched. Becker stepped between them. Neil stood at her shoulder. A crowd formed. Several bystanders pulled out phones and recorded. Neil ordered both men to step apart. The first man backed away. The second stayed tense. Becker kept steady words. The man finally relaxed and lowered his fists. Officers escorted both away from the vendor area. No arrest. No injury. While Neil wrote the report, a large black SUV stopped near the fountain. The chief stepped out. His face carried the same tense expression from weeks earlier. He scanned the crowd and demanded updates from officers nearby. He spoke with clipped words. He spotted a young woman filming him and ordered her to move. She refused. He repeated himself. She stayed on the sidewalk and continued recording. Her angle captured the chief, 2 officers, and half of the fountain. Neil and Becker noticed from a distance. They watched the confrontation form again. The sergeant walked toward the chief and whispered in his ear. The chief ignored him and waved toward the woman. Officers froze. The scene repeated itself. The woman kept her phone raised. She stood on public ground. She did not interfere. She filmed silently. The situation mirrored the courthouse incident. Neil and Becker moved closer but stayed back. They listened to every word. The chief took 1 step toward the woman and held out his hand. He looked prepared to take her phone. Before he reached her, the sergeant stepped between them just like before. His voice remained calm. He told the chief to stop. The crowd watched. Cameras recorded. The chief's face filled with anger again. The sergeant held his ground. He reminded the chief that the council's ruling now stood as policy. The chief tried to order escorts again. No one moved. The woman kept filming with slow breath and steady hands. Reporters at the event captured everything. Some recognized the chief from news coverage of the courthouse incident. They lifted their phones and recorded too. The chief stared at the sergeant. His jaw clenched. His eyes burned with frustration. The sergeant kept his posture tall and clear, no threat, no step backward. The chief turned away and walked toward his SUV. He slammed the door and drove off. The crowd watched in silence. No officer spoke to the woman. She turned off her phone and walked away. Becker shook her head and sighed. The sergeant gathered his squad near the fountain. He gave a short speech. Officers respected the badge, but law stayed higher than rank. No one seized devices without lawful grounds. Anyone who tried would answer to policy and video. Neil admired his calm. Every officer listened. News outlets posted the video that night. Headlines spread fast. The chief tried again to stop a recording at a public event. Social media exploded. Calls for resignation surfaced. The city waited for an official response. 2 days later, the council scheduled an emergency meeting. The agenda listed one item: administrative action involving the chief. Rumors flew across the precinct. Some said the chief planned to retire. Others said he might face termination. The atmosphere tensed again. During his patrol that afternoon, Neil walked past the Civic Center. Walker stood on the sidewalk filming the entrance. He nodded at Neil. Neil nodded back. Walker said nothing. He pointed his phone toward the door and waited for the meeting to finish. After an hour, council members walked outside and announced the result. The chief stepped down. His termination became effective at midnight. The city attorney read a brief statement. The chief violated policy twice in public view. The council removed him to protect integrity and restore trust. Walker lowered his phone and sighed. The sergeant arrived a few minutes later and shook Walker's hand again. Neil watched the exchange. He saw no anger, no gloating, no celebration. Only relief. By the end of the day, officers gathered in the break room. No one cheered. No one joked. A chief lost his badge. The job demanded higher standards than rank or power. The sergeant addressed the room. He said no officer won when a leader failed. He said every future order needed lawful grounding. Neil returned to his patrol car and wrote another note in his log. He observed that the department faced public scrutiny and passed the test. He also noted that honest officers protected the city when leadership faltered. Night settled on the city. The precinct stayed quiet. Bodycams glowed in the dark patrol lot. The streets rolled forward with routine calls and calm breath. Trust in the department rose, not from words, but from actions. The story moved to court and council chambers. but the lesson grew on sidewalks and street corners. Rights mattered. Cameras protected everyone. Public spaces belonged to the people. The department adjusted fast after the termination. The deputy chief took command. He moved into the office without ceremony. No speech, no smiles. He signed papers, reorganized duties, and met with every supervisor. He asked for honest reports. He asked for weak points. He wanted transparency in every corner. The precinct held a meeting in the briefing room that Friday morning. Chairs packed the space. The deputy chief stood near the front with a clipboard. He looked calm and precise. He outlined new expectations. He said the department served the public with law and restraint. He reminded everyone that cameras protected truth. No arguments, no debate. His tone stayed sharp and clear. Neil sat in the back beside Becker. The room listened without tension. The deputy chief said he respected officers who challenged unlawful orders. The line of command deserved respect, but the law remained stronger than rank. Several officers exhaled. Relief filled the room. After the meeting, supervisors handed out new policy cards. Each small card fit inside a uniform pocket. It listed First Amendment rights, seizure rules, and distance guidelines. Officers slipped the cards next to badge wallets and bodycam batteries. Some officers whispered that the department needed this change years earlier. Others felt embarrassed that the city needed to correct a basic rule. Neil did not dwell on it. He only cared that the department moved forward. Later that week, Internal Affairs finished its final notes. The file on the chief closed. The department posted the outcome on the city website. Citizens read every sentence. Comments poured across forums and local groups. Most praised the department for accountability. A few still held anger, but the tension lifted from public space. Walker posted one last update. He thanked the city for responding with action. He said respect went both ways. He encouraged viewers to remain calm during police encounters. He said officers protected the community when policy guided them. His post spread across social media and drew support from across the state. A month passed. Spring settled over the city. Trees turned bright. Crowds filled sidewalks again. Protests stopped. Arguments with officers slowed. Recording incidents dropped because officers never challenged them. Still, Internal Affairs wanted full restoration of trust. They brought in an outside legal analyst to hold workshops. Neil attended a session with 20 officers in a conference room inside the courthouse. The analyst stood near a projector and explained public rights with precise detail. Every officer took notes. No one tuned out. The room stayed focused. At the end of the session, the analyst played a clip of a police force in another state that embraced transparency. Officers stood near reporters without conflict. Citizens recorded freely. The analyst said the city in that clip showed high public trust. The department in Neil's city wanted the same. After training, officers left the courthouse and crossed the street. A group of students walked past the precinct and waved. They recognized Becker from a school event. Becker waved back. The moment felt small and simple. Neil noticed it. Trust returned piece by piece. By late spring, the department faced a new challenge. A civil claim arrived from a former business owner. He said officers mishandled a dispute at his store. He filed the claim without video or witnesses. The city attorney reviewed it and asked the department for bodycam footage. The footage showed the store owner shouting at customers and refusing lawful commands. The claim collapsed. Cameras ended the dispute before it gained momentum. The deputy chief used that incident as a teaching point. Cameras did not hurt officers who followed the law. Cameras proved honesty. Cameras shielded the department from false claims. Officers mentioned the case again and again. But while the department moved forward, the city held one last loose thread. The chief hired a private attorney and threatened to sue the city for wrongful termination. He said the council acted unfairly. He said the incident on the sidewalk did not justify removal. The attorney filed paperwork and demanded video evidence. The city attorney gathered every recording from that day, body cams, witness clips, and Walker's footage. They cataloged each angle with timestamps. The attorney filed a response and waited. 3 weeks passed. The former chief withdrew the claim. His attorney stopped calls. The council faced no trial. Officers returned to routine. The subject ended, but something larger happened inside the department. Officers stopped viewing cameras as a burden. The mindset shifted. Cameras saved careers instead of ending them. The sergeant repeated that belief during roll call. One afternoon, Neil walked into the records office to file a report. He saw stacks of old hard drives stored in metal cabinets. The records clerk said the department stored thousands of hours of video each year. Most never surfaced. Some protected the innocent. Some exposed misconduct. The clerk believed every second mattered. In early summer, the city held a community event near the river. Food trucks lined the waterfront. A stage hosted a local music group. Children ran across the grass with balloons and snow cones. Neil and Becker patrolled on foot. People waved as they passed. Parents thanked them for being there. Neil noticed phones pointed at them, but the mood stayed open and warm. Cameras did not feel hostile. Cameras felt normal. Near sunset, a teenager approached and said he wanted to become an officer. He asked about training. Becker explained how academy work focused on community and law. Neil told him that respect formed the foundation of the job. The teenager nodded and walked away. When night settled, crowds drifted home. Vendors packed their equipment. Officers closed the event without trouble. No complaints, no arguments, no conflict. Video from the event recorded calm interactions. Officers said it felt like a turning point, but the department still lacked a permanent chief. The deputy chief held the office temporarily. Rumors spread that the council reviewed candidates from across the state. The department waited for a decision. 2 months after the former chief's termination, the council announced a public meeting to select the permanent replacement. Citizens planned to attend. Officers planned to observe. Reporters prepared their cameras. The meeting took place in a large auditorium near City Hall. Dozens of chairs filled the space. Reporters stood near the back with lights and microphones. The council sat behind a long table on the stage. 3 candidates waited near the front row. One retired from a coastal department with decades of union experience. Another ran a small precinct in a quiet suburb. The third candidate worked in a large urban district and built a reputation for strong community trust. The council interviewed each candidate. They asked about public filming. Each candidate supported transparency. They asked about officer conduct. Each candidate demanded accountability. Then they asked about leadership under pressure. The urban district commander spoke with firm clarity. He said policing needed restraint from the top. He said officers followed example. He said trust came from honesty, policy, and steady practice. The council listened with interest. When the public comment period opened, Walker stepped forward. He stood at the podium with printed notes. He spoke about civil rights and constitutional standards. He said officers treated him with respect even when their leader failed. He asked the council to choose a chief who respected the public without hesitation. His voice stayed clear and calm. The crowd listened. Officers in the back nodded. The council ended the meeting and entered closed discussion. After 1 hour, they returned. The chair stood and announced their decision. The new chief would be the urban district commander, Commander Lewis. Applause filled the room. Reporters rushed forward. Cameras clicked. Some officers shook hands. Others sighed with relief. The department gained a leader with fresh experience and a clean record of public trust. The next morning, Chief Lewis walked into the precinct. He shook hands with every supervisor. He introduced himself to every squad. He gathered the department in the briefing room and spoke with steady confidence. He said the badge represented duty, not power. He said filming stayed lawful. He said transparency protected everyone. He said every officer would receive support when acting within policy. He promised fair discipline when policy failed. Officers listened without fear. The sergeant stood near him and nodded. Neil watched from the back. The change felt real. The department turned a corner. Over the next few weeks, Chief Lewis inspected patrol units, watched training sessions, and reviewed policy revisions. He asked for reports on community interactions. He wanted officers to treat every contact with professionalism. He demanded calm responses even in tense moments. During one of his first days on duty, Chief Lewis went on a ride along with Neil and Becker. He sat in the rear seat and observed without interference. They responded to calls, assisted at minor crashes, and checked on residents. He saw how officers interacted with the public. He saw people filming from sidewalks. He saw officers keep distance and patience. When the shift ended, the chief thanked them. He said the department moved in the right direction. He walked into the station with a balanced stride and light expression. Internal culture shifted again. Officers respected the new chief. His leadership lacked ego. His decisions lacked anger. His presence restored stability. By midsummer, the department reached normal rhythm. Bodycams stayed active. Training continued. Citizens watched officers with confidence instead of suspicion. One evening, Neil sat on a bench near the Civic Center during a break. He looked across the street and saw Walker again. He filmed the building during a council session. Neil felt no tension. Walker waved. Neil waved back. Walker turned back to his lens and continued recording. Trust did not grow from speeches. It grew from daily action. It grew from respect shown between officers and citizens. It grew from cases handled without force or threats. The department learned the lesson hard. A chief lost his badge for ignoring rights. Officers stood firm. The city responded with policy, transparency, and new leadership. The streets stayed quiet. The precinct stayed calm. The public regained confidence. The job felt steady again. A simple device recorded truth. A citizen demanded accountability. And law stayed stronger than rank. A calm rhythm settled across the precinct after Chief Lewis took command. Officers stepped into patrol shifts with steady confidence. Call volumes stayed normal. Daily reports flowed without drama. The chief visited roll call rooms twice a week. He reminded everyone that public space belonged to the people. He repeated that lawful filming required no interference. The message reached every squad, but trust did not sit still. It needed proof during tense moments. That proof arrived on a humid afternoon near the West District Market. Neil and Becker patrolled the area on foot. Vendor tents lined the sidewalk. Crowds shopped for fruit, bread, and handmade crafts. Musicians played beside the fountain. The event looked peaceful, but the precinct knew this spot experienced conflicts in the past. Arguments over booths and space sometimes escalated into shoving or broken tables. As Neil walked near a flower stand, a loud shout echoed across the tents. A vendor demanded payment from a customer. The customer argued back. Shoppers backed away. 2 phones lifted to record. Neil stepped in with a calm voice. He separated both sides with raised palms and short instructions. Becker stood beside him. The vendor explained his complaint. The customer denied wrongdoing. Neil asked for receipts and timestamps. The vendor produced a printed record. The dispute ended without anger. The customer paid the missing amount. Both shook hands. 2 bystanders recorded the entire interaction. Then they lowered their phones. No tension. No conflict. No orders to stop recording. The officers walked away and the crowd returned to normal. A local reporter witnessed the moment. He filmed a short interview with the vendor. The vendor praised the officers. The reporter asked to speak with the precinct. Neil declined, but he told him to contact the department media office. The story aired that night and painted the officers as fair and balanced. Comments on the station's website reflected trust instead of fear. During roll call the next day, the sergeant mentioned the footage. He said fairness kept peace. He thanked Neil and Becker for a clean resolution. The squad nodded. A few weeks later, the department faced a larger challenge. A public protest formed downtown to address unrelated city issues. Organizers expected a large turnout. Officers prepared for traffic control, barricade placement, and crowd monitoring. The protest group announced that filming would document all interactions. Chief Lewis held a briefing with the full command staff. He assigned clear roles. He instructed supervisors to maintain space between officers and protesters. He ordered officers to respect filming without comment. Every step needed restraint and precision. The protest began on a Saturday morning. Hundreds filled the street with signs and flags. Officers stepped into position. Cameras pointed in every direction. The crowd marched from the riverfront toward the courthouse. Traffic stopped at intersections. Drivers waited with minor delays. As the crowd passed the Civic Center, a group of agitators tried to provoke officers. They shouted close to faces and filmed reactions. Officers did not respond. They stood in formation with steady posture. The agitators lost interest and drifted back into the march. The entire protest ended without injury or arrest. The organizers thanked the officers. Video from the event spread across social media. People praised the department for restraint and respect. Even critics admitted that the police handled the protest well. The next week, another test arrived. A group of independent auditors traveled through the region. They recorded public buildings, police lobbies, and government offices. Some auditors searched for conflict. They filmed until someone overstepped the law. The department prepared for their visit. 3 auditors arrived one morning and entered the precinct lobby. They recorded the receptionist desk, badge wall, and seating area. The lobby officer greeted them. He asked if they needed assistance. They said they were filming for a public record project. He nodded. He asked them to avoid secure doors. They agreed. No confrontation. No argument. One auditor tried to push beyond the lobby. The lobby officer raised his hand and blocked access. He told him that restricted areas required clearance. The auditor backed away and continued filming the lobby. The visit ended after 15 minutes. They left with no incident. 2 hours later, the auditors posted the video online. They praised the department for professional behavior. They said officers understood the law. Thousands watched the clip. Comments supported the department. Trust continued to rise. Chief Lewis reviewed the clip during lunch in his office. He sent a message to every squad. The message said that knowledge and restraint protected dignity. Officers appreciated the recognition. 2 months passed. The precinct held a public forum at a community center. Officers sat on folding chairs beside residents, business owners, and youth mentors. The chief answered questions about traffic stops, noise complaints, and response procedures. Citizens raised concerns about speeding near schools. The chief promised new patrol routes during school hours. Residents thanked him. They asked if they could record traffic stops. The chief said recording stayed lawful from public space. He said officers would respect that right. Neal and Becker watched from the back row. The room felt calm. People spoke without anger. The chief listened without defensiveness. The forum lasted 2 hours. Families left with smiles and handshakes. Later that week, Neal handled a call about a suspicious person near a bus stop. A resident claimed someone stared into car windows. Neal arrived and approached the suspect. The suspect filmed with his phone. Neal introduced himself and asked questions. The suspect answered without hostility. Neal learned that the man waited for his bus and rested against a parking meter. No crime occurred. No search, no detention. The suspect boarded his bus and left. Later, the man posted the footage online. He said the officer respected his rights. The clip received supportive comments. Small interactions fueled steady trust. Chief Lewis continued surprise visits to patrol zones. He rode with officers during night shifts. He observed traffic stops and welfare checks. He never interfered. He thanked officers for calm decisions. He wrote short notes in his small notebook. Officers admired his presence. It felt supportive, not controlling, but the precinct still needed a final measure of strength. Internal Affairs wanted an outside audit. They requested an independent criminal justice board to review recent incidents. The council approved. The board included attorneys, retired officers, and community members. They reviewed bodycam footage, arrest data, and use-of-force logs. Their report arrived after 3 months. The board concluded that the department demonstrated stronger accountability than the state average. They praised the department for lawful filming policies and respectful interactions. The council posted the report online. Residents read it and commented with relief and gratitude. Meanwhile, Walker posted one final video about the precinct. He stood outside the Civic Center and spoke into his phone. He described the changes over the past year. He praised the department for supporting public rights. He credited officers for lawful restraint. He said the city felt safer and more open. The video spread across local pages. People shared it and thanked officers. Even those who distrusted the department began to change their view. Near autumn, Neil sat in the break room during a night shift. Becker sipped coffee across from him. The sergeant entered and sat with them. He said the department reached a rare point. Public trust stayed stronger than before. Officer confidence stayed high. Policies made sense. Training matched daily practice. The sergeant said the next step involved consistency. He said every new officer needed strong guidance. He asked Neil to help with field training. Neil agreed. Becker offered support. They shook hands and returned to patrol. During the next month, Neil trained 2 recruits. He taught them how to handle calls with clear communication. He showed them how to interact with citizens who recorded. He reminded them that respect de-escalated tension. The recruits learned fast. They treated the job like service instead of force. One patrol call tested the recruits. A driver argued during a traffic stop and pointed a phone at the officers. The recruit stayed calm. He explained the stop, issued a warning, and returned the license. The driver thanked him and drove away. The recruit exhaled with relief. Neil told him he handled the stop with skill. The recruit smiled. On a crisp evening near downtown, Chief Lewis held a short ceremony in front of the precinct. He recognized officers who guided new recruits. He handed out 4 commendation letters. Neil received 1. Becker received 1. The chief thanked them for steady service. Cameras filmed the event. Reporters covered the story. Citizens clapped. After the ceremony, officers gathered near patrol cars and talked. The chief stood beside Neil and asked if he planned to pursue promotion in the future. Neil said he focused on patrol. The chief nodded. He said leadership started at any rank. He appreciated Neil's integrity. The sun dropped behind the skyline. Streetlights brightened the sidewalks. Officers secured gear and rolled out for evening calls. That night, Neil and Becker patrolled near the riverfront again. They passed restaurants and parking lots. People laughed outside a bakery. A couple filmed a street musician. A teenager recorded skateboard tricks near the steps. A few waved at the officers. Neil waved back. The department no longer viewed cameras with suspicion. Cameras became part of daily life. They protected officers, protected citizens, and strengthened the relationship between both sides. The story began with confrontation on a sidewalk. It ended with shared trust in public space. The badge did not stand above the public. It stood beside the public, and the camera never felt like a threat again. This wraps our report. In the next upload, we cover a border checkpoint incident where a forged passport failed under a patrol officer's body cam. If you want a free guide on lawful recording rights and officer requirements, check the next video drop. It arrives soon.